Central Falls, as those of you in the audience may or may not know, is a what might be termed a post-industrial urban community just 6 miles north of us. And on August 1st, 2011, Central Falls made history, and not in the best way, by filing for Chapter 9 bankruptcy. This was and continues to be a big deal, like international news coverage, big deal. City governments don't usually file for bankruptcy. And as one of the first cities in the country to do so, Central Falls in many ways has become a poster child for the effects of the recession on our distraught urban communities. Hopefully the work I do can help the city also become a case study of what can be done to turn around a community like this. As one half of a 2-person planning department, I have the opportunity to do quite a lot of things. I work to promote our city's underutilized building stock. I work to amend the zoning ordinance or to enact tax policy. I do a lot of grant writing. I work with city agencies, nonprofits, and businesses to try to promote the city however I can. And I work to provide affordable housing. I do a lot of things, but in Central Falls, our chief undertaking, our mandate from the state is nothing short of reimagining and reinventing every aspect of a community, from the way it looks to the way it functions. I want to use this point to make a humble argument to all of you soon-to-be urban studies graduates. The argument is that places like Central Falls matter, and they should matter to you. These are the communities that have experienced the most disinvestment. These are the communities that are the most undervalued, and this means that these are the communities that have the most potential to provide returns to society, if only society would make an investment. I want to argue that when you consider where to invest that degree of yours and all your passion and knowledge, consider distressed urban places that our economy, and it seems like so much of our society, has forgotten or worse, chooses to ignore. Not only is the need the greatest in these places, but so too is the reward. The opportunity to do more, to play a bigger role than you might otherwise working somewhere else. Look at me, I just graduated, I'm a freaking urban planner. By the way, if this message resonates with any of you, the Central Falls Planning Department is looking for interns. We need to update our comprehensive plan, and please see Heather next week for more details. That's my plug. And so Central Falls faces many challenges. Chief among them is housing. After the housing market crashed in 2008, Central Falls was flooded with hundreds of foreclosed properties. Additionally, the property values from which the city derives most of its revenue plummeted. This shock to the system, experienced not just in Central Falls but all over the country, has led society to rethink how the public and private sectors can best provide efficient and sustainable housing. Our panel of experts today will help shine light on this central issue for so many communities. Our first panelist is Frank Ford. Frank Ford is a Senior Vice President for Research and Development at Neighborhood Progress, Inc., NPI, where he directs land assembly, vacant property reform, and neighborhood stabilization initiatives. A licensed attorney, his 35 years in the field of community development include housing development, commercial retail development, organizational development, human capital development, and applied research. Mr. Ford drove all the way out here from Cleveland, Ohio. That's how much he wanted to be at this conference. So please give him a hand and welcome him to the conference.
It was a pleasant drive. Listen to books on tape. And I am actually very happy to be here. Had some dinner last night with some of the other presenters, and really like this one restaurant, Gracie's. If you haven't been there, I certainly will speak for it. So let me start my PowerPoint here. You know, the title in the agenda, did you want, might be, well, I could, yeah, maybe I should put it to the, where is the view for, yeah, slideshow?
from beginning. Here you go.
Okay, thank you very much. On the agenda, I think the title is a little different, although I thought the challenge of sustainable urbanism is the title, but if you look carefully at the agenda, you'll say it says efficient housing, and I'm probably straying, and my co-panelists, we all agreed on this, that we might take some liberties here, but my particular angle on this is going to spin off from really what Steve was saying. In challenged markets, in weak market cities. We don't necessarily like the term weak market, but I'm going to use it today because I think it fits. And one of my challenges, a personal challenge, is that I know that there's a couple people here in the audience, your students, who are big Cleveland boosters and fans, as they should be. And so the challenge for me is, how do I talk about a city that is facing such severe challenges without appearing negative? And I do want to say at the outset, Cleveland is a fantastic town. We've got one of the best art museums in the country, one of the best symphony orchestras. We have a neighborhood called University Circle, which has 30 institutions: Case Western Reserve, University Hospitals, Cleveland Clinic, the Art Museum. I mean, it's just a fantastic place. And in terms of innovation, I think Cleveland is one of the leading places in the country when it comes to community development and forward thinking. I was joking with some people a few minutes ago before we started that the term reimagining has been used throughout the 2 days here, and you'll keep hearing it a lot. I will say we coined the term in Cleveland with the Reimagining Cleveland project in 2008 that does community gardens, urban farming, orchards, even vineyards. We have one of the best housing courts in the country, probably the best university-based data system in the country for tracking community development. So that's the good stuff. But now I have to tell you what's some of the reality we're dealing with here. So we start with similar to Detroit, and actually similar to Pittsburgh, sprawl out migration. We certainly achieved a lot, some of which I've already mentioned. But then, and actually before I talk about this slide, let me give you an image of something. For me, the 30, 40 years that we were struggling without migration, loss of jobs, I envision I'm standing waist deep in a river. And it's pushing me back, but I can make progress. With hard work, I can do that. And that was, I think, the Cleveland community development industry in Cleveland for 20, 30 years made great progress. Making the city and its neighborhoods livable, competitive places. But that's waist-deep river. Then you get the tsunami. And we didn't borrow that term just because of the tragic event in Japan. We've been using the term for about 6 years in Cleveland. 30,000 share of sales, 16,000 vacant homes, 1 out of every 10. Home sale prices, because of all the blight around them, are now worth half what they used to be. And that translates to a lost homeowner equity, and then $54 million in uncollected property tax. I listened yesterday very carefully to what the mayor of Pittsburgh had to say. In fact, I was very impressed. I do think Pittsburgh has actually gone beyond Cleveland in many ways, but I do want to point out, if you're wondering, well, why can't Cleveland do exactly that? I looked up this morning. In the last 6 years, they had 1/3 the number of foreclosures we had. That's a huge difference, makes a big difference. So it leads me to something that's really, for me, if you asked me 10 years ago, would we be thinking of demolition as a community development tool? I would have said no way. I mean, everybody, all my friends, all my colleagues, even if we weren't diehard preservationists, none of us would want to see these houses go into landfills with oak flooring, oak woodwork. I mean, houses are never going to come back, but if you think about it, if you live on a street where there's 5 vacant homes, one across from you, maybe one each side of you, and you've got kids, those houses keep getting broken into. Now, if a housing preservationist comes to you and says, I'm sorry, we can't take these down because we're preservationists. I tell you, when you talk to neighbors in Cleveland, they'll say, I don't care about that. Get that house down because it's unsafe and it's dropping my property down. I can't sell my house because of that house sitting near me. And I'm going to talk a little bit about rehab in just a minute, because you may be saying, well, what about rehab? We'll get there. Excuse me, I went too far. I wanted to focus on one house in particular as a case study. It's in a neighborhood in Cleveland built around the turn of the century Wells Fargo foreclosed on it in '08, $85,000 loan. They took it back in '05. They took it back at sheriff's sale in '08. In '09, they sell it to a flipper investor for $2,500. Seems like they took a loss, right? Well, they got out luckily because it wasn't demolished when they owned it, so they didn't get stuck with a $10,000 demolition bill. Best Buy Properties buys it. 10 days later, after they put it on their website, they find some sucker in England who pays $41.50. For 10 days of doing nothing, no work, they make a little profit. There's a business model there if you do a volume. And I do have, to take you sort of directly into this, let's see, if I want to get now to, this is part of a PBS NewsHour video that was shown last summer, and they borrowed a YouTube video that I did, and I like the way they edited it, so I'm going to use, I'm starting this in the middle because I don't want to spend a lot of time with it, but I want to take you inside this house. Will the sound be on if I turn this? Yeah, I think it will. No, it isn't. Okay, the speaker is, oh yeah, there we go. I see it right there. Okay, well that's me saying something, but we're moving on. Good and healthy for a neighborhood. There's a home that Wells Fargo foreclosed on in the St. Clair neighborhood, and it was abandoned and wide open to access in terrible condition. When I was out here before, the side window, side door was wide open, and there was water rushing in the basement. Side door is still wide open. And notice the Burger King bag. Is somebody in there? I think I'm going to go inside. I wasn't too sure. Anybody here? Yeah. There's the basement door. It's probably not enough light to see. I'm holding the camera over the basement stairs. I think that's it. I don't think I want to be here too much longer. They sold it to an investor for $2,500. The investor put it on the internet and in 10 days found somebody in England who paid $4,100. I talked to that person in England. They said they were sent photographs that misrepresented the condition. They thought they were buying a turn-of-the-century home for $4,100. What they've got now is a house that's going to be torn down, $10,000 demolition lien, and the end person who loses is the guy in England who didn't know any better. And everybody else gets out with something. Actually, the last thing that I would have added if I thought about it is that the neighbors who live next door and on the street, those are the ones who are actually also paying the price. Back to my PowerPoint here. So why not renovate these homes? Oh yes, same thing again. Okay, let me find a slideshow from current. Okay. You know, I know it's not a good idea to load up a slide with numbers. But I think this is important. You're students, you want to learn something. This is important. 10 years ago, right at the time you had your last conference, right? $25,000 acquisition vacant house back then, $80,000 renovation. That's new mechanical systems, $20,000 in soft costs, loan interest, attorneys, legal, title costs, et cetera, $125 total. Back then we could sell it for $125, no subsidy required. Today, you can get it cheaper, $10,000. Put more into it because costs have gone up. Soft costs have gone up a little bit. $135,000. It's not too far off. But you can't sell it for more than $80,000. So to do that house today, same house basically, $55,000 in grant subsidy, gap subsidy, which that's a precious resource. And if you have 16,000 vacant homes in your community, how do you allocate those precious resources? Do you do one rehab, or do you remove 8 houses? And again, answering that question is harder if you're talking to a neighbor who has to live with all those vacant houses. Major shifts. I thought of 5 things that are different since you last had this conference. I think it's an intriguing idea, actually, to do a conference like this on a 10-year cycle, look at things in a broad picture. First, I decided to borrow from It's a Wonderful Life, Jimmy Stewart, the movie. The first thing is 80 years of post-Depression banking regulation. I mean, most modern banking regulation comes out of the Depression. When there was this, you see the photo on the left, that's the run on the bank. People are worried about losing their life savings. And in response to that, Congress passed laws that said banks have to operate safely, and soundly when they make loans. Now, I don't know what the photograph on the right is, I just liked it. So I don't have a real plan for it, I'll have to come up with something later. But subprime lending, the securitized pools of risky loans, that throws safety and soundness out the window. And that started around 95, very quietly, but by 2000 it was pretty heavily underway. And of course, we saw the effects of it really hitting big around 2005. The second is today, foreclosure used to be a remedy that you would foreclose, a bank would foreclose on a single house on a street of 40 houses. No big deal. The house isn't going to lose value. It's surrounded by valuable stuff. And you can recover your value. That's the purpose of foreclosure. Now you get to today, where 20 houses on a street of 40 are foreclosed on. It's surrounded, everything's surrounded by other blight. Those properties, we're destroying value instead of recovering it. We have banks today, and I'm using Wells Fargo, the example in the Best Buy in my video, shows exactly what this is about. They had an $85,000 loan. Instead of modifying the loan, they said, no, we're just going to go, we've always foreclosed, that's what we're going to do. Okay, go ahead and do it. Look what you end up with. You end up with a house that's virtually worthless. They're lucky they got the $2,500. They basically were dumping that house, offloading that liability. The new thing, bank walkaways, I mean, you've probably heard of homeowner walkaways. They're underwater, so they leave the home. We have a phenomenon in Cleveland, and I think it's starting in Detroit and other cities. It's banks walking away. They get the foreclosure judgment, but then say, wait a minute, we don't want to go to sheriff's sale. We don't want to take this property. There's a liability there. We'll just leave it. The foreclosure just sits there inactive. Third is how code enforcement is viewed. Code enforcement is probably the single greatest tool that municipalities have to preserve homeowner value. The bank's attitude is, well, this doesn't apply to us. We're not homeowners. Well, I'm sorry, but it's supposed to. Problem is cities are overwhelmed with the volume of vacant properties. And the banks have managed to get by virtually unscathed without having to pay. And I already mentioned demolition. This is a huge change. To think about demolition as a community development activity, and I'm sure there'll be some questions for me about this one. I expect there will. And my last one is, and I think it's perhaps the single most important thing, or one of the most, is that there's now an enormous shift of the cost burden to the taxpayer. Not on the backs of those who emptied out the homes. I mean, they made a business judgment. Let's empty out these homes, bull ahead, rush ahead with foreclosure, and they end up with vacant, worthless properties. There's a business judgment there that needs to be held accountable. So the cost is the millions of dollars for demolition, uncollected property tax, the devaluation of adjacent properties where homeowners are living, and lost revenue for schools, police, fire, city services. Recommendations, well, one is, I'm not laying a foundation for this, but there is a law called the Community Reinvestment Act. You may have read about it in your studies. It was 1978, 77. And basically, it took the It's a Wonderful Life, Bailey Brothers building a loan, the scenario I presented with the foreclosures and the need to operate safely and soundly. But the law said, well, we've been operating safely and soundly for 50 years, but African Americans and Latinos aren't getting loans. So we need to have a balance. Meet the credit needs of the community, including those who are not white, but balance it against safety and soundness. So CRA said, make these loans, but do it safely and soundly. This was around, as I said, 78. For the next 20 years, the history of CRA lending, which was the backbone of a lot of community development, had virtually no foreclosures. So the mere idea of loaning to people of color is not the problem. It's making loans unsafe and unsound. You may have heard the term no-doc loans, where these subprime lenders are making loans, not even requiring that people had the documentation to repay them. My recommendation on foreclosure, it's a privilege that banks have to come in and use our court systems. If they want to do that, then I think they should, there's an admission fee. The admission fee ought to be, if you start the foreclosure process and find the house is vacant, you don't walk away. You take title and you accept responsibility. I think we should enable judges to hold banks in contempt. If that requires a state statute, we should do it. Possibly requiring a bond that banks have to post before they foreclose, so if there's a demolition, there's money to pay for it. Shifting the cost burden back to the banks. Well, I like this this is Jimmy Stewart pounding his fist saying, yes, we're going to get tough on code enforcement. Move the code enforcement system upstream to while the banks actually have title. Loan modifications. Well, loan modifications, banks have been doing it for several years now, but the one thing they don't want to do is principal reduction. It doesn't sound logical. Why would we take an $85,000 loan and reduce it to $50,000? Well, here's why. I should show them my video. You can end up with a house worth $2,500. So what's better? Isn't it better to rewrite the loan, let the person stay in the house, and you're taking a loss on the principal, but it's a lot better than ending up with a worthless house. Desperate times require another Jimmy Stewart. I found all these photographs. I had to figure out how to use them. Desperate times require thinking outside the box. Now, this was directed to my field, the community development field. We have, for 20, 30 years, always assumed we're going to rehab a house. It's got to have all new mechanicals, new roof, new windows, new systems, everything. And I have to say, and now green standards. And I'm sure this will provoke a reaction amongst the audience probably, but, and I don't even like it either, but for the next 5 years, while we're trying to stabilize communities, is it worth it to just say, maybe we do something different for the next 5 years? Let's see if we can do rehab that keeps people in homes. It's up to code, but it's not replacing every mechanical system, and it's not green standards. Again, controversial, I know. Last point is land banking. Land banking, I think, is truly one of the most innovative tools in the last 20, 30 years when it's connected to a property tax collection system. The way ours works in Cleveland is every year there's a certain number of people who pay late. And they are going to pay, but they pay late. It turns out that that's $6 to $8 million a year. It's money that the schools and the police and fire, it's not the basic tax they're counting on, it's extra. Now, I know there's a trade-off here, because earlier I'm saying, well, we have lost revenue, shouldn't we use that for other things? Well, in our system in Cleveland, we take that extra money and we're putting it towards supporting a land bank that can pay for the demolition. My last thoughts are, I was gonna make a pitch for you to come to Cleveland after you graduate, but see, I can't because it wasn't Bedford Falls. What was the town? Central. Yeah, Bedford Falls is It's a Wonderful Life. Central Falls, okay. So I have to agree. I think you could go to Central Falls, but if you want to come to Cleveland, you can be part of I think two things. One, an incredible challenge, one of the most significant social justice issues I think of the last 30, 40 years, and you can be around people doing really creative things. And if you're interested, give me a call. Heather and Hillary know how to get in touch with me. Thank you very much. Thanks.
It's actually been really great to be back for the last 2 days. I feel a bit like I'm a student again, and it's been really exciting and sort of recharging for me. When you work sort of day in and day out on projects and are dealing with the challenges that all of us who are speaking are dealing with, it's great to come here and sort of hear the energy and enthusiasm and see the excitement that the current students have. And also to hear from colleagues who are working on such interesting projects across the country. It's really heartening to know that so many cities and so many people are working on so many different things. And I've gotten a lot of ideas that I hope to be able to take back with me and incorporate into projects that I'm working on. So just thank you for the invitation. And picking up on what Rebecca said this morning when she spoke as an alum, the Urban Studies program really was an amazing start for me. I took US 21 Introduction to the City my first semester at Brown, and it really set me on my path. It was when I knew that that was what my concentration was going to be, and from then on, it got me out to learn about Providence and get off the hill and experience all the amazing things that Providence has to offer. The neighborhoods, see what challenges were facing the city. And then in my second semester was the 1992 Urban Affairs Conference, the second version of Who Will Save the American City. And so that was a real sort of reinforcement of thinking about and hearing about what was going on in cities across the country, and that really helped to shape my thoughts about what I wanted to study in the remaining years that I had at Brown. And the types of work that I might like to do once I left here. So the one thing that when I think back to that conference that sticks out is one of the speakers was Joel Garrow, who wrote the book Edge City, which was very popular at the time and was sort of the thinking at the time in the early 90s that people were moving out to edge cities, these sort of places that were springing up at the intersections of interstate highways, and that was the future, and everyone was sort of moving to these places, and what was the future of the American city. So it's actually been very interesting to see over the last 2 decades since that conference and that idea that cities haven't gone away. There are certainly challenges, and we're talking about a lot of those, but people are moving back to cities, and there is revitalization that's going on, and people haven't all moved out to these, auto-dependent little nodes at the interstate intersections. And so it's interesting to see what we're talking about at this conference 20 years later. Still a lot of challenges, still a lot of things, problems that need to be resolved, but an interesting change from 20 years ago. So just a little background. I'm going to talk about 2 projects that I've worked on at the Richman Group in my current position. But for a little bit of background to that, after I left Brown, I moved to New York City and participated in the city's Urban Fellows program, which is something that I highly recommend to the current urban studies students to look into. It's a program that the city of New York runs, and every year they select 25 recent graduates and folks who come from around the country to do a year-long fellowship. And you work full-time at a city agency and then have weekly seminars with your fellow urban fellows. And each week you get to meet with commissioners and people who are involved in nonprofit groups and developers and government relations and public relations, and learn about urban issues in the context of public service and how the city works on issues and shapes responses to urban issues. And it was a great introduction for me to New York City, coming from a small town in upstate New York, just outside of Rochester. Providence was a nice step up to a city, and then going and participating in Urban Fellows was a great way to get an introduction to New York City. And like Rebecca and Sarah, who spoke earlier, I worked at the Parks Department. And spent a year in the planning office there working on planning projects, new parks that were being created. And then through my work there, found out about a position at the city's Department of Housing Preservation and Development. And HPD is the largest municipal housing agency in the country. It has been in existence in one form or another for many decades. It's a mayoral city agency. It has a commissioner. And it has sort of an amazing array of tools and responsibilities in the city of New York. It's the city's code enforcement agency, so there's a whole part of the staff that's devoted to maintaining the city's housing stock. It has a variety of financial tools available to it to provide loans to private property owners. The city over the years, especially in the 70s and early 80s, took title to a lot of properties that had tax liens, and so it actually became the landlord for literally thousands of New Yorkers lived in HPD-owned and controlled buildings. And over the years, through a variety of programs, has rehabilitated those properties and returned them to private ownership, either through nonprofit or for-profit developers. And then HPD also, not insubstantially, is the city's urban renewal agency. So it has the power to assemble private property, the power of eminent domain, to sponsor redevelopment projects across the city. It doesn't do too much of that anymore, but there has been a legacy of property that HPD has owned, properties that stayed in its inventory for a very long time when the city's population was declining and there was no real market for redeveloping those properties that had been taken in the 60s and 70s when the city had money to do that. And so by the early to mid 90s, when I started working at HPD, there was a real push to try to figure out what to do with the property that was in HPD's inventory. So there were all these programs to rehabilitate existing buildings, but there were a lot of vacant properties that the city owned. There were either old urban renewal sites that had never been redeveloped, or were sites where the city had taken properties through tax foreclosure and that had become vacant because the old previous buildings on the sites have been demolished. So I think one of the things that is probably a theme that you're hearing a lot of people talk about, and I've certainly noticed in my time working at the city during ups and downs in the economic cycle, is that some of the most creative thinking happens during the down times, because there isn't simply money to throw at problems. You have to think about new ways and new opportunities to do the work, to achieve the goals that you have, to improve housing, to revitalize neighborhoods. And so in the mid-90s in New York City, there had been this big push under Mayor Koch, which continued under Mayor Dinkins. Mayor Koch started the first 10-year housing program, and a lot of the funding for that program went into those rehab programs, revitalizing neighborhoods. At one point, HPD was the largest property owner in Harlem, and I'm going to talk in a minute about Harlem and the revitalization that's been happening there over the last 15 to 20 years, excuse me. But to think that the municipal government owned such a massive amount of property in one neighborhood, and similarly in other neighborhoods, the South Bronx, Central Brooklyn, the Rockaways in Queens, and what that meant, and trying to think of ways to put that property back to productive use. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about some projects that I worked on at HPD and some initiatives at HPD, and then how that sort of segues into the work that I'm doing at Richman now, because Richman was involved in some of the projects that got built in Harlem. So when I was director of large-scale development at HPD, we created a program called the Cornerstone Program, and it was an initiative to take large vacant properties that the city owned and try to interest developers in building new apartment buildings. The cities hadn't really had a new construction program for multifamily apartment buildings in a very long time. There hadn't really been a funding source for it. Most of the city's funding had gone into rehabilitating existing buildings. And there were important reasons for that. There were existing buildings. Some of them were vacant. A lot of them were actually occupied. There were people living in extremely awful conditions in buildings that the city had owned for 10 or 20 years. And so there was a real push to focus the agency's financial tools on rehabilitating those buildings. And so when we first started the Cornerstone program, we had no budget. We had a name, and we did a request for proposals, and we essentially said, here are a dozen sites. What would you like to do with them? We'd like some apartment buildings. How can we make that happen? And people responded, and developers responded to that, and we were able to designate development teams for that first round of sites, and through a lot of hard work, actually get new apartment buildings built on them. And in our early stages of the program, we had a real particular focus on homeownership. A lot of the programs and the projects that HP works on are rental properties, but there was a real focus at the time on creating new homeownership opportunities, to have people who would be investing in the neighborhood, who would be long-term owners, and finding a way to make that happen, and also to make it happen at a scale that fit with the density and the development and the transit availability in neighborhoods like Harlem. So HPD had some programs that built townhouses, but they're just, in Harlem, the context is 5- and 6-story apartment buildings. It's very dense, it's well served by transit, so there was a real need to come up with a way of building larger apartment buildings. And so the projects that are on the screen now are actually two that the Richman group did when I was at HPD, before I joined the Richman group. The project on the left is called the Hamilton. It's on 145th Street. It's across the street from Jackie Robinson Park. And it's a 77-unit middle-income co-op financed by HPD and HPD's sister agency, the Housing Development Corporation. And then kitty corner from that property is the project on the right, which is called the Langston, which is a 180-unit condominium which is a mixed income condominium. So there's affordable condo units with income restrictions, and then market rate condominiums as well mixed in the building. And so those are along 145th Street, which is one of the major east-west corridors. So they also, both buildings have ground floor retail space to sort of weave together what had been a couple of blocks of absolute vacant land and vacant buildings, and try to reknit this east-west retail corridor. So the Hamilton was completed in 2003, the Langston in 2007. Both were very successful. All the units have sold out, and the investment in these projects and other ones on surrounding sites that were developed through the Cornerstone program has really helped to revitalize. This is a portion of Central Harlem called Bradhurst. It was one of the most devastated and impacted neighborhoods in Harlem, where there was a significant concentration of city-owned property. And so now there are people living there again, there are businesses, and the Parks Department has invested in Jackie Robinson Park, which is no longer a scary place to go, but has a lot of programming. And there's a friends group, the Jackie Robinson Park Conservancy, which has helped to bring in new programming and has really helped to revitalize this section of Harlem. And now I'm going to move on to another site. This is at 127th Street and St. Nicholas Avenue. So this is about 18 blocks south of the two projects that I just showed you. And this was a site that the Richman group was designated to develop, and this is what it looked like before. It's almost a full block, but, and here's where the challenges come in, it's not a full block because the city owned 17 lots on this block, but didn't own the other 6. So there are 5 existing buildings that we had to build around, and 1 vacant lot. And St. Nicholas Avenue, which is on the left in this picture, is where the 4 subway lines, the A, B, C, and D lines run. And just at this corner here out of the photo is the entrance to the 125th Street station. So in addition to building around 5 existing buildings, 4 of which are occupied, our challenge was to build up against an operating subway line. Not easy, but there's ways around everything. So we were actually designated to develop this site in 1999. I was going to do a slide with showing the timeline for this project, but I thought it would actually take about 3 slides to get through all of the ups and downs. So we were designated in 1999. At the time, it was going to be one homeownership project on the whole site. There is a building, not this one with the white wall here, but the one just behind it, which at the time was vacant and city-owned and was part of the site and was supposed to be part of our site. And through a sort of bureaucratic snafu at HPD, ended up in a rehab program. And so that caused a problem, and you'll see when I show you the next slide that it just created another building that we had to build around, which sent us back to the drawing board. Also over time, after a lot of these homeownership projects were built, there was a shift back in the community sentiment toward wanting more rental apartments and a need for more affordable rental properties. So the project shifted back from a homeownership project to rental. We also went through a very long and drawn-out environmental review process and a rezoning and actually an upzoning for the property. So we wanted to create extra density on the site. It's right at a subway stop where when you get on the subway from here, you're 1 stop from Columbus Circle and 2 stops from Times Square. So it's one of the best transit locations in Harlem, and it's really an appropriate place for transit-oriented dense development. So this is the after. So we completed this project last year, and in order to get the block built, we had to break the project down into 3 separate pieces, 3 separate phases. So this building is called the Balton. It's 156 apartments, and it's a mixed income project. 75% of the units are reserved for middle income households and 25% for low income. It's got 2 wings, which you can see in the the upper photo a little bit better, and that shows how we had to sort of weave in and out around an existing building, which when we were doing excavation was actually just sort of sitting there, surrounded on 3 sides by construction. Around the corner on Frederick Douglass Boulevard is the second phase project, which was also completed last year, called Douglass Park, which is another 70 apartments, all of which are low income. And then we're starting construction this summer on a third project called St. Nicholas Park, which is another 30 units. Just put a little bit of context. This is the views from the building, north and south. So we really have a great location. And we have a mix of studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms. And also, again, ground floor retail space to strengthen the St. Nicholas and Frederick Douglass Boulevard corridors. Just a quick look inside the building. And as with most affordable housing projects, this one was a real challenge in terms of the financing. A variety of different funding sources from HPD and HDC. The city provided the land for $1 per lot. And we were all set to go, and then the financial crisis happened. And it's really only because of the TCAP program, the Tax Credit Assistance Program, which was one of the programs created under the Obama stimulus plan, that this project was able to go forward. We were a shovel-ready project, but we had a financing gap, and so the availability of that funding, which came through from HPD, which had an allocation, really was what allowed us to start construction in 2009. And I'm happy to say that the Balton, well, Douglass Park is 100% leased up. The Balton is 97% leased up as of last week. And we've gotten a really amazing mix and diversity of people moving into the building, which has really been great. I know my time is running out, so I'm just going to keep moving along, and you can ask me questions later. So this is just a picture of one of the apartments inside. And I just wanted to briefly talk about why this building is named the Balton. It's named for a former colleague of mine at HPD and a good friend, Ebo Balton, who was the longtime director of HPD's Manhattan Planning Office. And this is a photo of Ebo from a New York Magazine article about the revitalization of Harlem, and that building behind him has since been renovated. Unfortunately, Ebo passed away in 2007. He lived across the street from the Balton site for many years, and he always used to say that he would walk out his door and see that site, and he knew that something had to happen with it. And so he was a real mover within HPD to get that site redeveloped, as well as the rest of Harlem. And so the picture on the right is his family. A lot of them from the DC area came up for our ribbon cutting in the fall, which was really great, and was really powerful to see, and see them see the sort of the fruits of his work and what came out of that. So now I'm going to just really quickly talk about, in keeping with the theme of sort of cities with strong markets, sort of strong markets and then weaker markets, and trying to do a similar project in a city in upstate New York, Troy, where there is a weaker housing market than in New York City, but yet still a need for new urban housing and mixed income housing. So these are just some pictures to give you a sense of the flavor. If you've never been to Troy, it's really one of the most amazing, beautiful and intact late 18th, early 20th, late 19th, early 20th century downtowns. It was a major industrial city in upstate New York for many years. Like most upstate New York cities, had decades of population decline, but is starting to turn around. It actually had a slight uptick in population in 2010. And so a lot of things are happening. A lot of the historic buildings downtown are being renovated. Just speaking of cities on the hill, the middle view is the view down Broadway in Troy, from the hill that overlooks downtown and ultimately the Hudson River in the far distance. It's the view from RPI, which is Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. So like Brown, sort of situated up on a hill, it's certainly a period of time where there was a big disconnect between RPI and the city, but as with Brown, much more connection these days, much more investment by the institution, a real understanding on the institution's part that to remain a competitive institution, investment in the area is necessary and really critical for the redevelopment of Troy. Just a few more photos. And then Troy City Hall site, which is our new project. This is the old City Hall, which was a beautiful old building, which unfortunately burned down in 1938. And Troy City Hall bounced around through a couple other locations over the years until at some point someone decided that this monstrosity should be built not on the old City Hall site, but actually on the Hudson River. And so this building for close to 4 decades sat at one of the most important sites right where Broadway meets the Hudson River on Monument Square, which is the main square in downtown Troy. And this is what it looks like. And in a sense of poetic justice, this is it getting demolished. I'm very happy with these photos because it shows that good things can happen to bad buildings. And so now this is a vacant site, and the city has invested a lot of time and effort and gotten state grants to do a master planning process, and they did a developer selection RFP, and we were lucky enough to be selected. I put lucky in quotation marks because now we have to figure out how to redevelop this site. And so just very quickly, you can't see all the type on there probably, but this is the site plan that we came up with our architects. I pointed out Broadway before because the sort of line that slashes through the site is what would be the natural continuation of Broadway. So we're trying to reopen the view corridor that used to exist from all the way up on the hill down to the Hudson River, but which was blocked by the old City Hall, and create an actual connection through the site, and then through this series of stairs and ramps down to Riverfront Park. And this project serves as the southern terminus of Riverfront Park, which the city is also in the process of renovating to help revitalize its waterfront. And then we're still in the early planning stages, but right now the project it's planned as a mixed-use, mixed-income project with 104 apartments, ground floor retail space, possibly some office space, and some parkland. And so my final thought that I just want to share with everybody, we had a little conference call earlier this week, the panelists, to talk about our presentations, and we all, despite talking about the challenges that we face, wanted to also leave people on a positive note. And so I keep this picture on my computer, and just it reminds me that things may seem hopeless, but hang in there. They do get better. Progress is made, and revitalization does happen. And I'll leave you with that.
I have 2 things here. One is some pictures of the downtown. They provide a little description. And then I have an elevator speech that I'm working on. Maybe I'll start with the elevator speech, and then we can do the pictures, okay? So you can sit down for a second, Steve. I wanted to use housing, as a new urbanist, we're in favor of a mixture of uses as opposed to just a specific housing or office or retail. And we feel that every development, either the revitalization of a neighborhood or a new development, needs to provide these uses in order to be an active and alive and contributing place. And so what I did is try to set out a proposal really for those of you that are here this afternoon, which I appreciate, and really increasingly for the leaders of in this community to, and some of you, including Frank, have heard versions of this before. But since I think that as we approach the second decade of the 21st century, and we're coming out of a recession, we hope, we really have to get our games together. We're now competing on a global basis, and the sort of the kind of talking and the kind of process that you were just referring to that takes decades to get anything done, we just can't afford that anymore. We talk about not having financial resources, but we don't have the time either. So I point out here that Providence exists in a competitive and economic environment, both regionally, nationally, and internationally. And in order to succeed in the new century, it needs to attract and retain new economy workers, you guys, among others, and create a 21st century economy. Beyond its current institutional base as a university town and state capital. Providence exists as a satellite of the Boston economy, even though it is New England's second largest city. And this is a good thing to be built upon. And the city is well situated at the intersections, as you know, I-95 and 195. I think it's the third most populated intersection of that transportation system on the entire 95 system. On the main line of Amtrak between Boston and New York, in close proximity to a modern, efficient airport. Okay, why don't we get going? In order to attract and retain the young new economy workers, Providence needs to have housing typologies of the typologies desired by these new economy workers, preferably in dense urban neighborhoods, which also support the type of first floor uses such as independent retail and convenience uses, various affordable food offerings, including a full range of ethnic food, vegetarian food, and third places such as coffee shops, cafes, bars, music and dance venues. And further, the downtown needs to operate as an 18 to 20-hour city. These are the necessary requirements to make this equation work. Providence's old retail core in the center of the downtown, which we'll talk a little bit about later, which was built largely in the late 19th, early 20th century, and includes excellent buildings of that era, some of which have already been converted to rental housing, needs to continue that evolutionary trend, providing more of current mixture of uses attractive to the current generations in their 20s and 30s. Subsidies and or local patient capital sources need to be found to enable this process to continue. The overall strategy described here could be thought of as the necessary provision of, in quotes, needed infrastructure for the building of a new economy in Providence. If by reutilizing this former commercial core, the down city, Providence can provide the workers and the environment that workers require at a competitive cost to Boston and New York, then this strategy can be successful. How can this be accomplished? By working together, as the title of this conference suggests. To create a strategy which would allow for the ongoing conversion of the remaining historic structures that are suitable for housing into mixed income housing. And in the conversion of existing B and C rated office buildings which are not suitable for housing into the office typologies which are required by the 21st century businesses. In addition to an overall first floor merchandising plan, in quotes, should be adopted to provide the necessary infrastructure, i.e. the mixture of uses required to support the housing and entrepreneurial activities in the upper floors. The substantial completion of this strategy will tend to create the demand necessary to rationalize and make possible new construction, make it viable and allow for the provision of the required live, work, shop, play uses and options that make a great city and an emergent competitive economy. How to effectuate this plan? To date, the process has occurred by combining, quote, patient capital, federal historic tax credits, federal new market tax credits, state historic tax credits, city property tax stabilization, project-related investments by the local community foundation, the Rhode Island Foundation, in the forms of subordinated debt, and direct housing support through pilot payments and time. Going forward, programs to support new construction, i.e. tax stabilization, or 15 to 20-year tax stabilization, I think specifically. The creation of a down city fund which could funnel patient capital investments from both tax-paying and tax-exempt institutions, partners to projects that were supportive of this overall strategy. This fund or a parallel fund could ideally include local investors who are willing to accept a civic return as part of their overall return, i.e. recognize the improvement of their city and their city's economy as part of their total return on investment, and want to participate in the establishment of Providence as a 21st century city with a robust housing, jobs, and cultural environment that will attract young, energetic individuals from other cities in their postgraduate years, but also be attractive to the sons and daughters who are currently Rhode Islanders, and allow them to feel that staying as part of their community is no sacrifice. No, this strategy is based on the theory that we can return to our historical role as a place of innovation, rich cultural diversity, and pride. In an era when government, the private sector, and the institutional sector are all concerned about diminished resources, the only course is for the three parties to increasingly collaborate with a common with a common goal of building a city that works, a city that draws on its strong and unique history, its extraordinary geography, and its accessibility. This can happen. It must happen if we are to be successful in the global competition that we face. We owe it to our current citizens and to our children and to our grandchildren. This can be done. So that's the end of that little piece. So let me do the.
You just use this one.
So I think Hillary threw about two different people asked me to talk a little bit about what's going on in the I-195 corridor. So this is, I didn't bring my laser. Down city, we were just talking about, you guys can figure that chart out there, but you can see where the highway came down just to the left, or where it says RISD, the little piers that are going across the river. That's where the old highway was, and the green area going through is where the highway was. It's about, net of streets, it's about 19 or 20 acres of land available. And the land that the institutions have focused on, it means it's only about 9 or 10 acres that would be left over. Institutions primarily being Brown and Johnson & Wales. So in fact, it's not a huge opportunity, because if you take the vacant land in downtown already, it approaches 100 acres of parking lots and unutilized land. So this is the I-195 thing is good to get everyone focused on a delivery system. How, once again, I go back to my point mentioned before, how are we going to come together as a community to make this happen? Now, for whatever reason, the series of political interests and everything have created a commission which actually gives you a third layer of governance on this thing. But hopefully, just by the very virtue of an institution like Brown trying to come off the hill and create its second campus down there, it will force people to cooperate. Most people don't even understand how the statute works. I was nominated by the mayor to be on that commission, but rejected by the governor for whatever reason. I'm not really sure. So anyway, that's a little bit about the I-195 commission. It'll probably take a couple of years before anything happens. Right now, Brown is trying in their dialogue with the city about how they're going to pay payments in lieu of taxes. One of their hang-ups is they don't want to commit to too much without knowing that they're going to get the land that they need in the district. However, the city can't provide that land. It's a third party, this I-195 commission, that's responsible. So there has to be, my proposal to both the leaders of Brown and the city is that there be a tripartite development agreement that is very specific. This is about making things easy. It's not about making things hard. And but so far, I think there's discussions about it. But So anyway, that's that slide. So this is the down city, and the old Westminster Street, well, those of you that live here know that, but that was the main shopping street, not just for Providence, but for the entire city and I mean, the entire state, really. That's where 7 or 8 department stores were located as recently as 30 years ago. So when we started working there about 20 years ago, when you were in college here, it was virtually abandoned. And they had done in the 80s, they put a pedestrian mall through it, which like many cities took the last stores out and made it an unsafe zone. So anyway, but we have a very strong preservation society here in the city, and that was the thing that prevented the buildings from coming down. Although when I started in '91 here, there was still talk in the city hall of leveling the whole area as a urban renewal strategy. So, so this is a nice photograph of Westminster Street. The brick church on the right is Grace Church. Further down, you can see the Turk's Head building, Federal Reserve. So it just shows, there's another slide right after this, which is further up the street. If those of you that know the work we've done downtown, these are the buildings that we worked on with the Peerless, at that time it was called the Boston Store on the left, and the right is Burgess and Norman, Alice Building, etc. And keep going. Okay, now if you're going to try and do this, you've got to kind of create some activities, some reasons to come down. There are not enough people living there or working there to actually support the activity that's going to generate interest in the place. So you kind of have to, it's a pump priming operation, and this is the kind of thing that the staff of Cornish Associates, working with people like Frank Latore and others in the city to get going. And so, the next slide. This is a building across from Trinity Theater. That was actually, it's a pair of Trinity. The buildings were built about the same time. Beautiful building, and it was foreclosed on at our suggestion by this, not foreclosed, but condemned by the city. And then they put it up for an RFP, and we were lucky enough to be successful at it. We turned it into the next slide. And so it's a series of those kinds of things that has to be done. And you just have to move forward. You can show the beginning and after results, and you try and build momentum about this thing. That's the game. This is the Lerner building on the corner of Eddy and Westminster. Lerner's was a underwear store, I think, for ladies. What?
Clothing store.
Clothing, yeah, but specializing maybe in underwear. You can see the beautiful, building that was on the right, and this is what was transformed in the left. This building is probably, because of its size, the furthest underwater in terms of investment, because the cost of actually taking it from the right-hand slide to the left-hand slide was very patient capital. And but still, you've got to do. These are. It's like repairing, replacing teeth in the street. The street is an urban fabric, and it needs to be repaired for people to feel comfortable and to stop the declines that both of you gentlemen were talking about. So people think that it's at least stabilized before it can start going up. Next slide. And this is the Boston store, or Peerless store, which is actually a conglomeration of 5 buildings that were built as the institution expanded over the years. And so this is the way it was on the right, abandoned except for Lupo's Heartbreak Hotel on the first floor, which actually was a great use that everybody loved, but the bass beat from the speakers vibrated the whole building so much that you couldn't actually be in any other part of the building when the music was playing. So we had to, it took us almost 2 years to find Lupo's another location, because we didn't want them to leave the district, and also and we had to facilitate that move. And then we have developed 98 units of housing in that building, and and about 20,000 feet of retail, and some offices in the back. So next slide. Or that's it?
That's it.
No?
Yeah. Good question for you, Frank. And you said how it was either demolition or renovation. Have you considered at all like housing deconstruction? Because I know it's sort of like a job training, and then it's probably somewhere in the price range between renovation and demolition.
Did somebody set you up with this question? I was talking to some people. I said, somebody should ask about deconstruction. We, 3 years ago, the Cleveland Foundation asked us to explore deconstruction, and we've done 45 homes, single-family homes. The issues are that a demolition is about 8,000. Deconstruction, being more labor-intensive, is roughly 14,000. So there's about a $6,000 differential. In theory, if you reclaim enough salvaged material, $6,000 worth, and can sell it, then it works. We found that we couldn't sell enough. Just make sure that. Oh, then you can probably hear me anyway, right? But,
Yes.
We found that we couldn't make it work. However, my opinion is that I think it still can work. Our problem was that we didn't include something from day one, which if I had to do it all over again, I would say we must start with a retail storefront operation as integrated part of the deconstruction, and we didn't have that. There is a Buffalo, New York has Buffalo Reuse. It's probably one of the best in the country, and they make it work because they have a storefront operation, but they add something else. The director there told me, he said, even if with our storefront, if we took only the reclaimed salvage materials from inner city abandoned homes, which are not the highest quality, he said we couldn't make it work. He said, but they take their retail operation, their storefront, and they solicit seconds from manufacturers who are, say, we're not going to put this out there, but we'll give it to you. And the resale of the salvage material combined with the donated good stuff actually makes their operation work. And so I think deconstruction can work. The problem is now for us to go back after 4 years and try to create the retail, our funders said, they had funder fatigue. You know, it's like we don't want to, we didn't think of it on day one. And so my lesson to everybody is, don't do what we did, start from day one, follow the Buffalo model probably, and build in a retail operation. So I think it's important, because otherwise we're dumping all this stuff in the landfills. I hate to do that. So.
All right, thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
So Frank, you were begging for someone to ask you about your moratorium on green building standards. And,
yeah, that was good.
So I think this is a question for the whole panel, because one thing is, maybe we just haven't put the burden on the right people to raise the money to build to a green standard. So for example, right now people have not made full use of even NSP, but under ARA there was almost $15 billion put out to do energy retrofitting of multiple types of buildings that is, a lot of it is probably going to be taken back because it wasn't ever even used, right?
And that's a shame.
So the real question is, how can we be creative about finding the right tools? Because one of my concerns is, if we give you a pass now on building to higher standards, then when do we reinstitute kind of discipline, right? And isn't it better to think about, and this is what sustainability is all about, paying now rather than paying later for things that we do wrong, right? Can't we figure out a way to build the right kind of coalitions of people, if they really care about sustainability, figuring out how to finance it?
I think of the things that I addressed in my talk, there are some that I'm more passionate and certain of. This one is one that I think is really open. And this whole question of, in fact, I will tell you that literally just 2 weeks ago, there's a group that meets monthly in Cleveland called, it's a coalition that's been looking at foreclosure, abandoned property, and I happen to be the chair of it. And I had proposed that we create a working group in Cleveland that explores how can we do rehab less than this $55,000 or more per house. So only one of the, I threw out the idea of the green standards because I think it's at least one of the things we should look at, but I'm not personally, to me, we still have work to do. We have to really look at all the different models, who's doing what, and ask ourselves where are the places we can be more efficient? How can we get the cost down? So I put it in there to be somewhat provocative. I didn't know George was going to ask the question, but I do think that I think it should at least be on the table as part of the things we look at. But I think we need to look at long and hard at it. And then part of your question, George, is the when. How long do we do this? And I clearly thought of it as a moratorium. It's something you do temporarily while you're trying to stabilize your market so you can get out of the downward spiral. And then, and I just threw out 5 years, whether 5 years is the time, is it 3 years, is it 6 years? I don't want it to be 10. I will tell you this, that some research I've done recently suggests that we have actually turned the corner in Cleveland. That in some neighborhoods, property values bottomed out 2 years ago. And in the county-wide, it appears that last year they might have bottomed out. So that's good news, George, that it's not an endless thing. But anyway, I didn't really fully answer his question. Maybe I'll let the others, but I'm admitting that it's not something that I even know the answer to. I'm just thinking it's the kind of discussion I think we have to have.
What was the question?
About sustainability?
Do you
green
green
standards.
standards? Do you put them in abeyance for 3 to 5 years while you're rebuilding the market?
I'd speak to the fact that the new economy housing people require that the projects they live in are sustainable whenever possible. It's a big issue for the younger generation. And so let's look at what the demand is. You know, it's not about it's different than neighborhoods that you're trying to stabilize, but when you're building new, you've got to do this, and you want to do it anyway. So.
I'll just,
And operating costs, if they can reduce operating costs, that's an important component.
okay, is it on now? There's a couple different levels, and Kurt and I were talking about this last night at dinner. There's the building by building issue of green building standards, and it's something that we struggle with in our new construction, the upfront costs of building a greener building, and what is a green building, and how do you evaluate that, and it's the way so many of the systems are set up, whether it's LEED or Enterprise Green Communities, or in New York State, there are programs run by the New York State Energy Research and Development Agency, NYSERDA. And so we think about these things often, or evaluate them on a building by building basis, but taking a step up from that and thinking about the Balton project that we did. It's at a subway stop, it's previously developed property, it's a place where density should be, and yet it was a long and torturous process to put something back that was essentially only replacing something that was there in the first place, in a place where we should have that density and that development. And yet we had to go through an entire months-long environmental review process to evaluate all of the environmental impacts of building back something was essentially there in the first place, and then an upzoning to allow more density where it should be dense. And we still have, in that building, a 40% parking requirement at a subway stop in New York City. So I just, the things that I am sort of grappling with and thinking about in terms of green and sustainable development are some of the bigger questions of, is that where, are those regulations and requirements that put such an onus on redevelopment in an existing densely developed urban area where we should be focusing and making things difficult to do, because that's what drives up the cost and makes people want to go out and plow down a farm and put up single-family houses, which will only end up costing so much more in the long run in terms of new infrastructure, and then maintaining that infrastructure and building schools and people driving in single occupancy vehicles to get to anything. So there are a lot of issues, and especially as it relates to affordable housing, and how do you balance off those costs and what is really affordable, and how do you define that?
Could I ask Chris a question?
I have a question for him.
I don't think people want to go to the suburbs anymore. I don't think they want to build new suburban developments. Look at these people here all want to live in the cities. Many of them grew up in the suburbs and they'd be caught dead in the suburbs the only reason they'd possibly go back is we can't get our city schools fixed. They have families. But I think the people of my generation want to live in the cities. The younger, was the largest generation. Now I think the millennials may be the larger, but those are the two largest generations in our history all want to live in the cities. It's a perfect opportunity to rebuild our cities. And the type of regulations you're talking about are so archaic. I mean, whether it's government or tax or not-for-profits, well-meaning not-for-profits that are trying to impose these kind of, I feel, less than appropriate. I'm with Frank on putting a 5-year hiatus on some of these things, and there's nothing that's more sustainable than redeveloping existing cities with existing infrastructures like you were talking about. There's nothing. So, I mean, if you actually weight it in any kind of understandable way, these other things are tiny in comparison. So, sorry, it's a passionate subject for me, but.
Yeah. Great.
But it's still very difficult, and that's why we need you to lobby all your representatives to tell them to turn this around, get a life. Sorry.
My question is for Mr. Ford. I was just wondering what you and your organization do with the properties after they're demolished, or if you have a role with them afterwards.
First of all, of course, the structure, unfortunately, except for the 45 that we, thank you. It wasn't on, sorry. Except for the 45 that we did deconstruct, they are going to a landfill. Now, so the land is probably what you're talking about, right? And I made the comment that when I began that in 2008, 4 years ago, we started a program called Reimagining Cleveland, which was, actually, I think, I'm very proud of this because on one hand, I think Cleveland is unique in that it is so aggressively confronting the problem of blight and vacant buildings. But at the same time, it started 4 years ago looking forward to beyond that. What are we going to do with all the vacant land as we accumulate it? And we used to think of vacant land 10 years ago or longer was every vacant lot has to have a new house. And we really, we woke up and said, you know what, we can't think that way any longer. We have to think of more creative uses. And so actually that PBS video that I showed you a minute and a half of, there's a great segment in it where they show the Huff Vineyard. This is where the Huff riots were in Cleveland. And now there's a vineyard. And we have orchards, we have an urban farm that's focused on food production. I mean, some of the same things you heard talked about for Detroit. So, I mean, there is a major effort underway to look seriously and in a very forward-thinking way of how do we take this land and break the mold of, you know, doing the most creative things we can that are sustainable. So, I mean, and one more thing, there's two parts to it. There's a short-term project which provides small grants to neighbors who might want to do a community garden. There's the longer-term stuff, the bigger things, the orchards, the vineyards, the food production, the farming. So we're looking at it in two different ways. Hope that answered your question. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
I want to get back to this question about regulations for green building. I heard a statistic last week that I was just astonished by, and that was that in New York City in 1980, the top 1% of earners accounted for 12% of all income in the city. Today, that number is 40%. So when you're talking about a $50,000 rehab and tacking on $20,000, $30,000, you're still talking about a reasonably priced house. It's $80,000 when you're done. Aren't we really talking about a problem of income distribution? Isn't that what it really boils down to? That's a very affordable house, an $80,000 home, but you have people who can't afford that. Isn't that the problem?
It certainly is partly that, but I mean, it's also the market
there is a market condition which exists in Cleveland, which right now, so when we're done with that house, we've got 135,000 into it. And if we could find people that would come and buy those at 135, I wouldn't be saying what I'm saying. We've actually done about 250 rehabs. The city of Cleveland did 200 of them using the NSP program, HUD Neighborhood Stabilization. And my organization did our own program started a year earlier than NSP, and we did 50 rehabs. I'm basing this on the real experience of trying to sell homes. So I know from one perspective it sounds like, well, that's a very affordable house. Well, if you're standing in Cleveland trying to sell it, it doesn't work. I mean, if the house was located in a different place, and it's partly what's holding it back is the presence of the other 16,000 abandoned properties. We do a very nice job of creating a house that's rehab. And we have story after story of people come down, they drive down and look at the house. Great house, I love that house. Oh, but I'm not sure I want to live across the street from this one. I don't want to live down the street from that one. And, that's where the 16,000 problem is. You've got to get rid of enough of the blight to bring back the value so you can sell the house for the price you're talking about. So I'm not really disagreeing with you except to point out there's a market reality that we're living with.
No, I moved to Cleveland in '83. Okay. I remember driving around Huff with Norm Kromholtz, and he showed us posts in the ground so that people wouldn't dump on the vacant lots that he had cleared away when he was planner. But it still seems that no matter what, we're kicking the can down the road unless we confront this fact that, Huff is a classic inner city ghetto area, and the people living there cannot afford sustainable housing at what it costs to build a sustainable house now. And we're talking about people who really, because of their race, in some ways have no choice but to live there. So there's no market there in part because of this income distribution problem, as well as the racial problem.
But this could be a tangent that could take us off for, this would lead into George's time, but George is going to find this interesting because actually he and I, we've talked about this. I didn't bring up another major project that Neighborhood Progress is embarking on right now, which is confronting, we've been working for 20, 30 years on this hole in the donut with the theory that it's almost like somebody said earlier, if you build it, they will come. If we just build the place better, that will solve the problem of the poverty in the city of Cleveland. Well, the truth is it would retain wealth and it might bring in some new wealth, but it wouldn't really address the people who already have poverty. And our community development system has not really adequately looked at job training, workforce development, asset and wealth creation, and that's the thing we're looking at now. But here's the question, though, that we're confronting ourselves, is if we did add to our community development system or partner with or somehow collaborate in a way that really addresses that poverty in the hole in the donut, what will happen if we're able to take people where they are on fixed income and now they're making enough that they can buy the home you're talking about? But are they going to buy the home in that neighborhood, or are they going to move out? And so our challenge is, how do we add a whole new component to our community development system, which looks at individuals' wealth creation, while at the same time not letting go of what's a really pretty good infrastructure in Cleveland to work on place. I mean, ideally, we should be doing both. We should be creating great places that people will choose to want to be in, even after we raise their income up. But the problem is, whether they had the income or not, I'm not sure they'd buy the house on that street with the other houses needing to be demolished. So you raised a great question, and I know it got me off on a tangent. George might talk about it later. Yeah.
Last question. Hi, this can be kind of brief. Mine's also about green regulations and things like that. But I guess the way I see it, as any sort of student who studies these things sees that investment in sustainable homes and design and things like that is an investment in future social and economic sustainability of a city, which is a substantial investment to make if you're thinking long term. But as we can tell, it's kind of hard to sell people on that for the upfront costs of it. But what's interesting is that with things like taxes, we put incentives on things every day to sort of encourage those things that don't necessarily see a value in the first place. And what I'm wondering is if in your fields that you work in right now, is there any quantifiable topic or sort of incentive that you interact with that would make those things possible? Like, is that something that is out there?
Are you talking about taxes in particular? I mean, 'cause you
Well,
mentioned that.
Not necessarily taxes, but some sort of construction that puts a value on the long-term investment as opposed to, for a social benefit, as opposed to just whatever the first input cost would be.
Well, I mean, you're really articulating the reason why people should do green standards, is because you want sustainable housing that's sustainable in the long term. And so, and I'm not against, I want to make sure I'm not against green building standards. I mean, you have to understand, I don't just, I'm not just in my office theorizing about stuff. I've looked at literally probably 500 vacant homes in the last several years. And unfortunately, I've been inside, as you could tell, which I shouldn't do. But, and I'm not just out there, I'm talking to the neighbors on the street. And when you talk to them, these questions of, well, shouldn't we have green standards? It's like you've got to weigh that against the reality that you're living with. If you want, I mean, it should be a green, sustainable thing to think about. How do we save the city? How do we save the neighborhoods? And in some ways, the demolition of properties, while it doesn't appear green, is actually green, and then it's preserving everything else of value. It's trying to bring up the value of everything else. I know I'm doing a good job of not answering your question, right?
I think that was the answer.
Okay, well, maybe it
Yeah.
was, good.
The answer is to preserve the city, and,
Yeah.
and in the case of Cleveland or Detroit or any of these things, the actual requirements for housing and other things are dramatically less than they were. So how do you take the provision of the available resources and focus it on the things that you want to preserve and survive? And what are those things? They're not just housing. There's obviously economic issues and job opportunities and stuff. So it's complex. It's a really good question. See, I think the point I was trying to make about Providence and other East Coast cities is that we actually have the opportunity. We don't have the same problem. It's just a different problem. So it's hard to generalize, have a generalized response to your question. But the overriding thing is the limited resources. And that's why people like you guys need to start making the point, to the leaders that people have to get off of their own silos with their own issues and start working together and provide for, you have to prioritize the 14 things you need to do and get the first 5 going. Creating some positive momentum, because it's the same thing about downtown. We had to stop the decline first. And once everybody saw that it wasn't getting worse every year, then you could start creating the argument about how could it get better. But so it was like, what's ripe? What are the things can you do first to turn that around? So is that?
And well, I just have a very sort of specific answer to the question for our projects in New York State. NYSERDA, which I mentioned before, actually provides specific financial incentives for developers to work within different programs that they offer, and it helps to cover the cost of bringing on green building consultants. So if you're at now I was talking about the big picture level, this is back at the very specific building level. There are incentives, at least in New York State, and I'm sure in other states as well, that actually help you cover the cost, so that it's not an added cost to bring on green building consultants and look at different ways that for each specific project, and we've utilized this on several of our projects already and are trying to incorporate it into all of our new projects going forward, to bring on people to specifically look at each project and decide what things we can do to make each project. And we tend to develop rental apartment buildings, and so we tend to be a long-term owner. So there is a benefit to us in the long term to own a building that is more efficient. And there's especially in our affordable projects and in market rate projects, there's a benefit to people, to the tenants who are living in the building, to live in more efficient buildings, because then they're spending less of their money on utilities and heat and electricity if we can build a better building up front. So that's the very micro answer to your question.
That was kind of a lot of what I was looking for. So.
Hi, So my question, comment, just kind of in the theme of listening to what you've all been talking about and the themes that have been reemerging again and again over the last 2 days is obviously the greater problem that we're all facing is an issue of limited resources. And it seems to be kind of the hopeful part of all of this is that the thing that I keep hearing is reimagining and people starting to look at their own systems in a closed system, from a closed system point of view, and to try to understand that there will always be limited resources. We're facing this in Providence, we're facing it in the state, we're facing it across the country, and how can we make Down City Providence or the city of Providence successful without constantly looking towards subsidy and looking towards an endless supply of resources that is probably not going to change anytime soon. So I just wonder, in the last couple of years within each of you, people are starting to talk about it, but do you really see hope and real dedication to making systems work, to making things profitable on the ground level in Down City Providence, to making housing developments profitable on their own without requiring so much assistance from the tax base or from the state or from the federal government?
Well, I mean, that's the $64 question, is how it's the priming the pump thing. How much do you have to prime before it starts flowing on its own? I don't know. I mean, there's so many encouraging things, like the gentleman that was talking about Southside Land Trust in the previous thing. I mean, those are the kind of things that are happening, and they give me hope to see that. Local ag, I mean, that's something nobody was even talking about 10 years, and locally grown food, and you know, all these kinds of things are positive things that people get behind. They want to form communities around. You know, hope is our motto in Rhode Island, as you know, if you're a Rhode Islander. So we got it in our veins. We just got to figure out what it means and how to. And I think sort of getting off of our positions a little bit. And you know, I think I said in my remarks that we do have we're a small place. We should be able to have conversations. And I think actually, with a university community that we have, the universities community we have here, this is, I mean, hats off to you guys for having this conference, but this is where it can start. And so, yeah, I think Steve was talking about being in Central Falls, which is kind of the poster child of this right now. And they've even had to sort of disband representative government because it's gotten so bad. So that's a motivating factor for the rest of us not to go that route. And so there's both negative forces that are forcing us to talk, and then there's positive kind of ground up things. So, but you know, so I'm hopeful, but I don't know if I answered your question. But I think that's all we can be, right? We let a breath out, but the next one we take in. That's hope.